The Cascade Mountains of Washington State wore winter-like armor, beautiful, treacherous, and unforgiving. At 7,200 feet, the wilderness stretched in every direction, an endless cathedral of Douglas fir and western hemlock that had stood sentinel for centuries. The snow that had fallen 3 days prior lay pristine and undisturbed except for the delicate tracks of deer and the occasional wing print of a hunting owl. Senior Chief Petty Officer Jacob Jake Morrison guided his modified Toyota Tacoma along Forest Service Road 47, a narrow ribbon of gravel that wound through the high country like a tentative question. The truck's all-terrain tires crunched through ice-crusted patches where runoff had frozen overnight, and the suspension groaned against the uneven terrain with a rhythm that had become almost meditative over the past 6 hours of driving. Jake was a man constructed from contradictions. At 36, his face carried the weathered quality of someone who'd spent years in hostile deserts and frozen mountains, with crow's feet carved deep around storm-gray eyes that never stopped scanning, never stopped assessing. His frame was compact but dense, 5'10" and 185 pounds of functional muscle built from carrying wounded teammates and kicking down doors in Ramadi, Kandahar, and places that officially didn't exist on any map. A thick beard, salted with premature gray, covered his jawline, a luxury he'd grown during this mandatory leave after his 4th deployment in 5 years. His hands, scarred across the knuckles and along the palms, gripped the steering wheel with the easy confidence of someone who'd driven worse roads under fire. Beside him in the passenger seat sat his constant companion, his brother in arms, his reason for still being alive. Havoc. Havoc was a Belgian Malinois, a breed that looked like a German shepherd who'd been crossed with a caffeinated rocket and blessed with supernatural intelligence. At 70 pounds, he was smaller than a shepherd, but more intense, more focused, more everything. His coat was a rich fawn color with a black mask that made his amber eyes seem to glow with inner fire. Those eyes currently tracked the tree line with the unwavering attention of a predator, ears swiveling independently to catch sounds Jake's human hearing couldn't detect. Havoc wasn't just a military working dog. He was a Tier 1 operator, trained for missions that most people would never hear about. Explosives detection, high-value target apprehension, combat tracking. Havoc had done it all. He wore the scars to prove it, a puckered line across his left shoulder where shrapnel had torn through muscle, a notch missing from his right ear courtesy of a Taliban fighter's knife. They'd been together for 4 years, partnered after Jake's previous K9, a German shepherd named Titan, had died in his arms from a sniper's bullet meant for Jake. The Naval Special Warfare Command psychologist had warned Jake against bonding too deeply with his next dog, against letting the partnership become personal. Jake had ignored that advice completely. Havoc wasn't just his partner. He was family. CTA NUR 1, 250 words in. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. They were heading to a remote cabin Jake had rented for 2 weeks, a place so isolated that the nearest town, Timber Ridge, was 40 miles of Forest Service roads away. No cell service, no Wi-Fi, no connection to the world that had chewed him up and was threatening to spit him out. His commanding officer had been blunt during their last conversation, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many good operators burn out. Jake, you're running on fumes. You're seeing threats that aren't there. Last week you nearly drew your weapon on a UPS driver because he approached your door too fast. You need to decompress, to remember what it feels like to exist without a rifle in your hands. That's not a suggestion. That's an order. The leave was mandatory. 14 days. No contact with command, no mission briefings, no checking in on the team. Just Jake, Havoc, and the silence that Jake both craved and feared. The mountains offered what Jake needed most: isolation and the illusion of control. In the wilderness, threats were honest. A bear was a bear. A cliff was a cliff. There were no IEDs hidden in trash piles, no snipers waiting in second-story windows, no children with explosives strapped to their chests. Just clean, brutal nature. Jake pulled into a scenic overlook, the kind of place where tourists stopped in summer to take photographs of the endless green expanse. Now, in late February, it was abandoned. The picnic tables buried under 3 feet of snow, the interpretive signs frozen and illegible. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence was profound. No wind, no birds, just the faint creak of cooling metal and the sound of his own breathing. "Come on, boy," Jake said softly, opening his door. "Let's stretch our legs before the final push." Havoc needed no second invitation. He leaped gracefully from the truck, his paws leaving neat prints in the snow, and immediately began a perimeter check, nose to the ground, ears forward, tail level. Even on vacation, Havoc was working. Jake walked to the overlook's edge, where a rusty guardrail provided the illusion of safety from the 60-foot drop beyond. The view was staggering. The Cascade Range stretched to the horizon, peak after snow-covered peak, each one a monument to indifference. Nature didn't care about Jake's nightmares, didn't care about the faces he saw when he closed his eyes, didn't care about the weight he carried. He pulled a battered thermos from his jacket and poured coffee that steamed in the frigid air. The bitter, black brew was hot enough to burn his tongue, grounding him in the present moment. Havoc finished his inspection and returned to Jake's side, sitting with perfect military posture, his body pressed against Jake's leg. It was a gesture of affection and vigilance. Havoc could relax because Jake was on watch, and Jake could relax because Havoc was on watch. 2 weeks, Jake murmured, scratching behind Havoc's ears. No missions, no chaos, just you and me and a lot of silence. Maybe I'll finally finish that book I started 3 years ago. Maybe you'll finally catch that squirrel you've been tracking since Virginia Beach. Havoc chuffed, a sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh, his version of agreement. Jake took another sip of coffee, letting his shoulders drop an inch, feeling the knots in his neck begin to loosen. The cabin was only 20 miles away. He'd chop wood, read by candlelight, cook simple meals, and Havoc's body went rigid. The Malinois surged to his feet, every muscle taut. His nose pointed east toward a section of forest that looked identical to every other section. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest, a sound Jake had heard in Iraq seconds before an ambush. Jake's hand dropped instinctively to his hip, finding only empty space. No sidearm. Civilians didn't carry on leave, but his body remembered the motion, the muscle memory of 1,000 combat situations. "What is it, boy?" Jake asked, his voice dropping to the command register. "What do you hear?" Havoc's growl intensified. His ears swiveled, tracking something Jake couldn't detect. Then, barely audible over the mountain silence, Jake heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Mechanical, distant, wrong, an engine, running rough, sputtering, then silence, then a crash. Metal meeting earth with a violence that echoed across the valley. Jake's training took over. He pulled out his phone, no signal, as expected at this elevation, and oriented himself using the setting sun. The sound had come from approximately 2 miles east, down in the ravine system that cut through this section of forest. Someone had gone off the road. In these temperatures, at this elevation, going off-road was often a death sentence. Jake looked at Havoc. The dog looked back, his expression clear. Mission. We have a mission. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd come here to escape missions, to escape the constant pull of duty. He'd come here to heal. But he was a SEAL, and SEALs didn't ignore cries for help, even unspoken ones. "Load up, Havoc," Jake commanded. "We've got work to do." The 2 weeks of peace had lasted exactly 6 hours. 2 miles east and 400 feet below the overlook where Jake stood, Officer Sarah Coltrane was dying. She lay pinned in the driver's seat of her overturned Chevy Tahoe K9 unit, a vehicle that had been pristine white with proud blue lettering 12 minutes ago and was now a twisted wreck of metal and shattered glass. The SUV had rolled at least 3 times during its descent into the ravine, each impact shattering something else. Windows, axles, bones. Sarah's left leg was trapped beneath the collapsed dashboard, twisted at an angle that would have made her scream if she'd had the breath. Her ribs were broken. She could feel them grinding with each shallow gasp. Blood ran from a gash on her forehead, dripping into her left eye and painting the world in a red haze. But Sarah Coltrane wasn't thinking about her own injuries. She was thinking about her dogs. In the cargo area behind her, 3 Belgian Malinois, her entire K9 unit, were in crisis. Through the ringing in her ears and the fog of shock, she could hear them, whimpering, struggling, dying. Blitz, Apollo, Freya. Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, her vocal cords damaged from the impact, her lungs struggling to inflate against broken ribs. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, babies." Sarah was 32 years old, a 10-year veteran of the Washington State Police K9 unit, and one of only 3 female K9 officers in the entire state. She'd fought for this position, endured doubts and harassment and endless tests of her competence. She'd proven herself again and again, and her dogs were her pride, her purpose, her family. Blitz was her primary patrol dog, a 5-year-old male with a drive that never quit. He'd been trained in narcotics detection and apprehension, had taken down 17 suspects in 3 years, and had never failed to protect Sarah when she needed him. Apollo was her tracking specialist, a 3-year-old with a nose so precise he could track a suspect through water. He'd found 6 missing children in his short career, including a 2-year-old who'd wandered into the forest and would have frozen to death without Apollo's intervention. Freya was the newest, barely 2 years old, still in advanced training. She was supposed to be Sarah's cadaver detection dog, trained to find the lost and give families closure. She was gentle, sweet, the kind of dog who loved everyone. Now all 3 were injured, trapped in the cargo compartment that had partially collapsed during the roll. Through her damaged vision, Sarah could see Blitz trying to stand, his hind leg clearly broken, his breathing labored. Apollo was unconscious, blood matting his fur. Freya was crying, a high-pitched keening that broke Sarah's heart. The accident had been unavoidable. Sarah had been transporting her dogs back from a training exercise in Spokane, making the long drive back to her home station in Timber Ridge. The weather had been clear, the roads maintained, everything routine. Then a deer, a massive buck, had appeared in her headlights, frozen in that fatal moment of indecision. Sarah had jerked the wheel, avoiding the animal but not the consequences. The Tahoe's tires had caught the soft shoulder, and at 60 miles per hour on a mountain road, that was enough. The vehicle had gone airborne, sailed over the guardrail, and tumbled down the steep embankment in a nightmare of motion and noise that seemed to last forever. When the rolling finally stopped, Sarah was upside down, then right side up, then on the passenger side, wedged against a massive Douglas fir that had probably saved all their lives by stopping their descent into the deeper ravine beyond. Sarah forced her working eye to focus on the dashboard clock. The digital display was cracked but functional. 4:47 p.m. The sun would set in less than 2 hours. When darkness fell, the temperature would plummet from the current 32 degrees to well below zero. In her current condition, Sarah knew she wouldn't survive the night. Her dogs wouldn't either. She tried her radio, but the handset had been torn from its mount during the crash. Her cell phone was somewhere in the wreckage, but even if she could find it, there was no signal this deep in the mountains. Her emergency beacon, mandatory equipment for all wilderness patrol officers, had been in her gear bag. The gear bag was currently lodged under 200 pounds of twisted metal. "Help," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Someone, please." But there was no one to hear. This section of Forest Service Road was closed for the season. The nearest ranger station was 40 miles away. Her shift supervisor wouldn't expect her check-in call for another 3 hours, and even then, it would be morning before a search began. Behind her, Blitz whimpered again, trying desperately to reach Sarah, driven by the instinct to protect his handler even as his own body failed. Apollo's breathing had become wet and labored, internal bleeding. Freya had gone quiet, and that silence was somehow worse than her crying. Sarah's vision began to narrow, darkness creeping in from the edges. Hypothermia was setting in, her body shutting down non-essential systems to preserve the core. She was so cold. When had she gotten this cold? "I'm sorry," she whispered again, this time to the dogs who'd given her everything and deserved so much more than dying in a frozen ravine because of her split-second decision. "I'm so sorry I failed you." Her eye closed. The cold felt almost warm now, which some distant part of her brain recognized as a very bad sign. In the cargo area, Blitz let out one last bark. Not a bark of aggression, but one of desperate communication. A bark that said, "We're here. We need help. Please, someone. We're here." The sound echoed off the ravine walls and faded into the mountain silence. No one answered. Jake had driven for 20 minutes, his Tacoma crawling along progressively worse roads before he'd been forced to abandon the vehicle. The terrain had become impassable for anything on wheels, too steep, too treacherous, too many deadfalls across the path. He'd parked at a wide spot, activated the truck's emergency flashers, and geared up. Even on leave, Jake traveled prepared. From the lockbox in the truck bed, he retrieved his tactical pack, first aid trauma kit, survival blanket, rappelling rope, carabiners, water filtration system, MREs, and a handheld GPS unit. He also pulled out something he'd sworn he wouldn't touch during leave, his Sig Sauer P226, the sidearm that had saved his life in 7 countries. The mountains had bears, and Jake believed in proportional response. He strapped on his pack, checked his gear with the automatic efficiency of 10,000 equipment checks, and looked at Havoc. The Malinois was vibrating with anticipation, his entire being focused on the mission. "Track," Jake commanded, pointing in the direction the sound had come from. "Find." Havoc took off like a missile, his nose to the ground, his body weaving through the forest with supernatural grace. Jake followed, moving fast but controlled, his eyes scanning for hazards, deadfall, ice patches, unstable terrain. The forest was dense here, the canopy so thick that even midday would be twilight. Jake's breath created clouds of vapor that crystallized in his beard. The temperature was dropping as the sun sank lower, and the wind had picked up, carrying with it the promise of more snow. They'd been moving for 15 minutes when Havoc stopped suddenly, his body going rigid, his nose pointed downward over the edge of a steep embankment. Jake approached carefully, testing the ground with each step. When he reached Havoc's side and looked down, his stomach dropped. The ravine was steep, at least 60 degrees, and deep, plunging 200 feet before leveling out. Lodged against a massive fir tree about 120 feet down was a white vehicle, barely visible through the snow and shadow. The Tahoe was on its side, front end crumpled, roof partially caved in. Even from this distance, Jake could read the lettering on the mangled door, Washington State Police K9 Unit. "Oh, hell," Jake breathed. Havoc whined, a sound of distress. The Malinois could smell what Jake couldn't yet: blood, diesel fuel, and the stress pheromones of injured dogs. Jake pulled out his GPS unit, marked the coordinates, and surveyed the descent route. It was technical, would require rappelling for at least 60 feet, then careful climbing for the rest. The ground was unstable, covered in loose shale and ice. One wrong step and he'd join whoever was in that vehicle. He keyed his GPS unit's emergency beacon, a satellite-based system that didn't require cell service. Within 10 minutes, the signal would reach the nearest Forest Service station, giving them coordinates and a code that indicated multiple casualties. But Jake knew the reality of mountain rescue. Response time would be measured in hours, not minutes. By the time a proper rescue team assembled, rigged equipment, and reached this location, it would be full dark and well below zero. Whoever was in that Tahoe didn't have hours. Jake set up his rappel anchor, using 3 separate points on solid trees, distributing the load, triple-checking every knot. Havoc watched with intelligent eyes, understanding that his human was about to do something dangerous. "Stay," Jake commanded, pointing to a spot 30 feet back from the edge. "Watch." Havoc whined again, clearly unhappy about being left behind, but he obeyed. He moved to the designated spot and lay down, his eyes never leaving Jake. Jake clipped into his harness, tested his weight against the rope, and backed up to the edge of the embankment. The world tilted as he leaned back, his boots finding purchase on the icy slope. Then he descended into the ravine, hand over hand, his mind already calculating what he'd find at the bottom and whether his trauma kit would be enough to keep someone alive until real help arrived. The rope hissed through his belay device. Small rocks clattered down ahead of him, and from below, carried on the wind, he heard it. A dog barking. Desperate. Urgent. Jake increased his speed, controlled falling more than climbing, his boots skidding on ice. 50 feet, 40, 30. When his boots finally hit stable ground, he unclipped and rushed to the wreck. The Tahoe was worse than he'd thought. The entire driver's side was crushed where it had impacted the tree. The windshield was a spider web of cracks. Dark fluid, oil, coolant, blood, stained the snow. Jake moved to the vehicle, trying to see inside through the tinted, broken windows. "Hello?" he called out. "Can you hear me? This is Senior Chief Morrison, U.S. Navy. I'm here to help." No response from the front seat, but from the cargo area the barking intensified. 3 different voices, 3 dogs, all in distress. Jake moved to the rear of the vehicle, where the hatch had popped partially open during the crash. He grabbed the edge and pulled, his muscles straining, metal groaning. The hatch gave way with a shriek of protesting steel. Inside, chaos. 3 Belgian Malinois, all injured, all terrified. The largest one, Blitz, based on the name on his harness, was closest. His hind leg bent wrong, his eyes wild with pain but focused on Jake with the intensity of a working dog who understood that help had arrived. Behind Blitz, a smaller dog lay unconscious, his chest rising and falling in shallow, labored breaths. Blood matted his fur. The third dog, barely more than a puppy, was crying, pressed against the far corner, her front leg tucked against her body at an unnatural angle. "Easy, boy," Jake said softly to Blitz, using his command voice, low, authoritative, calming. "Easy. I'm here to help. Where's your handler?" As if in answer, a weak voice came from the front seat. "Dogs. Save. Dogs." Jake's heart seized. She was alive. He moved to the driver's side, dropping to his knees in the snow, peering through the broken window. The woman trapped inside was young, early 30s, with dark hair matted with blood, her face pale as death. Her eyes were barely open, unfocused, her lips blue from cold and shock. Her left leg was grotesquely pinned beneath twisted metal. But despite her condition, despite barely clinging to consciousness, her first thought had been her dogs. "Ma'am, I'm Jake Morrison. I'm a Navy SEAL and I'm here to help. Can you tell me your name?" "Sarah," she whispered. "Officer, Sarah Coltrane. My dogs. Please. I've got them, Sarah. I've got all of you. But I need you to stay with me, okay? Stay awake. Help is coming." Her eye focused on him for just a moment, and in that moment, Jake saw the same thing he saw in every operator he'd ever served with. The will to survive, the refusal to quit, the absolute determination to complete the mission, even if the mission was just drawing one more breath. "Can't feel my leg," Sarah breathed. Jake's trained eye assessed her injuries in seconds. Traumatic crush injury, likely arterial compromise, possible spinal involvement, definite hypothermia, probable internal bleeding. She was critical. All 3 dogs were critical, and he was alone on a mountain, 2 miles from his vehicle and 40 miles from the nearest hospital. The golden hour, the crucial 60 minutes after trauma, where intervention made the difference between life and death, was already ticking away. Jake pulled out his trauma kit and got to work. The mission had found him, just like it always did. Jake Morrison had performed trauma assessment in worse conditions, under sniper fire in Ramadi, in a flooding patrol boat off Somalia, in a collapsed building in Syria, while aftershocks continued to shake the rubble. But this scenario presented unique challenges that tested even his extensive field medicine training. He had 4 critical patients, 3 of them nonverbal, all of them hypothermic, and 0 chance of additional medical support for at least 3 hours. The temperature had already dropped to 28 degrees and was falling fast as the sun disappeared behind the western peaks. Protocol dictated triage: assess, prioritize, treat the salvageable, accept losses. Jake's heart said, save them all. He started with Sarah because she could communicate, could tell him what hurt, could help him understand the full scope of the disaster. "Sarah, I need you to answer some questions. Can you move your right hand?" Her fingers twitched. Good. Some motor function. "Can you feel your right leg?" "Yes, hurts." "That's good. Pain is good. It means nerves are working." Jake pulled out his medical shears and began cutting away the fabric around her trapped left leg, exposing the injury. What he saw made his jaw tighten, The dashboard had collapsed downward. The steering column had shifted, and Sarah's lower left leg was pinned between unforgiving steel. The leg was purple below the knee. Vascular compromise. If he didn't restore blood flow within minutes, she'd lose the leg. If he moved her wrong and dislodged a clot, she'd bleed out internally. Sarah, when did the accident happen? How long have you been here? She struggled to focus. Clock said 4:47. When we stopped rolling, Jake checked his watch. 5:23 p.m. 36 minutes. That was both good and bad. Good because she wasn't in immediate cardiac arrest. Bad because the longer a limb was starved of oxygen, the worse the damage and the higher the risk of crush syndrome when circulation was restored. From the cargo area, one of the dogs whimpered, a sound of pure agony that cut through the mountain air. "Your dogs," Jake said, keeping his voice calm. "Tell me about their injuries. What can you see?" Sarah's functioning eye filled with tears. "Blitz. His leg is broken. Apollo was bleeding from his mouth. Freya. She wasn't moving her front leg. I tried to reach them. Couldn't. I'm going to help them," Jake promised. "But I need to stabilize you first. I need to get circulation back to your leg. This is going to hurt. Don't care. Save the dogs first. Sarah." Jake's voice carried the command authority of a senior chief who'd led men through hell. "You're their handler. They need you alive. They need you to give them commands, to let them know it's okay to accept help from me. So, you're going to let me work, and you're going to stay conscious because those dogs in the back are terrified and in pain, and the only voice that can calm them is yours." Sarah's eye focused on him, and something shifted. She straightened slightly, fighting through the shock, drawing on reserves Jake recognized. The same reserves that kept operators fighting when their bodies said quit. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, what do you need me to do?" "Talk to your dogs. Tell them to trust me and stay awake." Jake worked fast. He used his multi-tool to pry at the dashboard, creating a gap of precious inches. He packed wound dressings around Sarah's leg to control bleeding when he moved her. He prepared his trauma blanket. Then he braced himself, gripped the steering column, and pulled with everything he had. Metal groaned. Sarah screamed, a raw, primal sound that echoed off the ravine walls and sent the dogs into frantic barking. But Jake didn't stop. He pulled until the column shifted 3 inches, enough to release the pressure on Sarah's leg. Blood rushed back into the starved limb. Sarah nearly passed out from the pain, her breath coming in hitching sobs. "Stay with me, Sarah. Talk to your dogs." Blitz," Sarah gasped. "Good boy. It's okay. Friend. He's a friend." In the cargo area, Blitz's barking changed from frantic to uncertain. The dog's training warred with his pain and fear, but his handler's voice, that was absolute. Jake quickly assessed Sarah's leg. Circulation was returning. Good. No obvious arterial bleed. Very good. Severe tissue damage and probable fractures. Bad, but survivable. He splinted the leg with branches and medical tape, wrapped Sarah in the thermal blanket, and gave her water from his pack. She was still critical, still hypothermic, but she was stable. For now. "I need to check on your dogs," Jake said. "Keep talking to them. I'm going to move fast, and they're going to be scared." "Apollo," Sarah breathed. "Check Apollo first. He was bleeding worst." Jake moved to the cargo area. The scene inside was heartbreaking. These weren't just dogs. They were officers, warriors, each one trained to serve and protect. And they were broken. Apollo, the tracking specialist, was unconscious, his breathing wet and labored. Jake checked his gums, pale, indicating blood loss or shock. He ran his hands over the dog's body and found it, a deep laceration along the rib cage where a piece of metal had sliced through during the roll. Jake pulled out his veterinary trauma kit, standard issue for K9 handlers, but also carried by some SEAL medics who worked with military dogs. He packed the wound with quick clot gauze, applied pressure, and wrapped Apollo's chest tightly. The dog didn't wake, which was probably mercy. Blitz was next. The big male watched Jake with intelligent, pain-filled eyes. His lips curled back in a warning growl that said, "I'm hurt, but I can still bite." "Easy, Blitz," Jake said softly. "I know it hurts. I'm going to help." "Blitz, stand down," Sarah called from the front seat, her voice weak but commanding. "Friend, trust." The dog's growl stopped. He licked his lips, a stress signal, but he allowed Jake to approach. Jake examined the broken hind leg. Clean fracture of the tibia, no compound break through the skin. Painful, but not immediately life-threatening. He splinted it with medical tape and rigid wrapping, working with calm efficiency while speaking in a low, soothing voice. "You're a brave boy, Blitz. You protected your handler. Good dog. Such a good dog." Finally, Freya. The youngest, still practically a puppy, pressed into the corner, her brown eyes wide with terror. Her front leg hung at an unnatural angle, dislocated shoulder. Jake's heart broke. She was so young, so scared, trusting humans to keep her safe, and that trust had led to this. "Freya, baby girl," Sarah called. "It's okay. Let him help you." Jake approached slowly, making himself small, non-threatening. He let Freya smell his hand, let her see he wasn't a threat. Then, with practiced precision, he manipulated the shoulder joint. Freya yelped, a sound that made Jake's chest tighten, but the joint popped back into place. The relief was immediate. Freya stopped trembling, licked Jake's hand, and pressed against him. "There you go, brave girl," Jake murmured. "There you go." He'd done what he could with limited resources. All 4 patients were stabilized. But stabilized didn't mean saved. They needed evacuation, needed a hospital and a veterinary surgical center, needed warmth and IV fluids and pain management he couldn't provide. And the sun was gone. Full darkness had arrived, and with it, the temperature plummeted. Jake's breath created clouds of vapor. His fingers were already going numb despite his gloves. From above, at the top of the embankment, Jake heard Havoc barking, sharp, urgent. The Malinois had stayed on watch, and now he was alerting. Jake scrambled up the slope, using roots and rocks for handholds until he could see Havoc silhouetted against the darkening sky. The dog was pointing east, his body rigid, his bark changing to a rhythmic pattern. Bark, 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 pause, bark, 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 3 barks, pause, 3 barks, the international distress signal. Jake's blood ran cold. Havoc was signaling to something or someone that Jake couldn't see. Then he heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of rotors. A helicopter. Hope surged in Jake's chest. The Forest Service must have received his beacon signal and scrambled an air unit. They'd be here in minutes. But then the sound changed. The rotors began to fade, moving away, heading south instead of toward his coordinates. "No," Jake breathed. "No, no, no, we're here. We're right here." He pulled out his emergency strobe, activated it, and waved it frantically at the sky. The bright blue light cut through the darkness, visible for miles. But the helicopter continued south, the sound fading until there was only silence. They'd missed them. In the darkness and the vast expanse of forest, the rescue helicopter had missed them by perhaps half a mile. Jake stood on the slope, the strobe light still flashing in his hand, and felt the weight of the situation crush down on him. He had 4 critical patients, no additional medical supplies, no shelter, temperatures dropping toward 0, and no rescue coming until morning at the earliest. Sarah Coltrane and her 3 K9 officers were going to die in this ravine unless Jake could pull off a miracle. He looked down at the wreckage, at the dim glow of his flashlight illuminating Sarah's pale face and the 3 dogs huddled in the cargo area. Then he looked at Havoc, who looked back with absolute trust and confidence. The Malinois' expression said, "You've got this. You always figure it out." Jake had led men through worse, had improvised solutions when there were no good options, had refused to accept defeat when defeat was the rational choice. "All right," Jake said aloud, his breath steaming. "All right. We do this the hard way." He descended back to the wreck and began to build what would either be their salvation or their tomb. The next 3 hours were a battle against time, cold, and the limitations of the human body. Jake worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd done trauma medicine in combat zones, but this was different. In combat, you had a team, you had backup, you had extraction. Here, he had himself, his pack, and a dog who couldn't carry supplies. First priority, shelter and heat. The wrecked Tahoe was a death trap. Metal conducted cold, and the broken windows let in the wind. But Jake couldn't move Sarah without risking further injury, and he couldn't separate the dogs from their handler. So he improvised. Using his survival tarp and paracord, he created a windbreak around the driver's side of the vehicle, sealing off the broken windows and creating a small enclosed space. He packed snow around the base for insulation, creating an improvised igloo effect. Inside this shelter, he placed 2 chemical heat packs from his kit, the kind that burned for 8 hours when activated. The temperature inside the makeshift shelter rose from deadly to merely dangerous. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, her body fighting shock and hypothermia. Every 20 minutes, Jake forced her to drink water, to eat high-calorie protein bars from his pack to stay engaged. "Tell me about your dogs," Jake said during one of her lucid moments. "How long have you been working K9? 10 years, Sarah murmured, her words slurring. "Started with Seattle PD, moved to state police 5 years ago. Fought for this position. They didn't want female K9 handler. Said I couldn't control the dogs. Said I wasn't strong enough. Looks like you proved 'em wrong." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's blue lips. "Blitz has 17 apprehensions. Never failed to protect me. Apollo found 6 missing kids, 6 families who got to say goodbye because of him. And Freya, she's gonna be the best cadaver dog in the state. Was supposed to graduate next month." Her voice broke, tears freezing on her cheeks. "They're going to graduate," Jake said firmly. "All 3 of them. I promise you, Sarah, we're all getting out of here." In the cargo area, Jake had repositioned the dogs, arranging them so they shared body heat. He'd wrapped each one in sections of his survival blanket, had given them water, had checked their injuries every 30 minutes. Apollo was the worst. The tracking specialist had woken briefly, whimpering in pain, before slipping back into unconsciousness. His breathing remained labored, and Jake suspected internal bleeding or a collapsed lung. Without surgical intervention, Apollo had maybe 12 hours. Blitz was stoic, his pain tolerance remarkable. The big male stayed alert despite his broken leg, his eyes constantly checking on Sarah, on Apollo, on Freya. He was still working, still protecting, even broken. Freya had curled up against Jake's side, her puppy instinct seeking comfort from the warm human. She shivered constantly, and Jake kept one arm around her, sharing his body heat. Havoc remained on watch above, his presence a constant reminder that Jake wasn't completely alone. At 9 p.m., Jake's GPS unit chimed. A message had been received via satellite. Coordinates confirmed. Weather delay, rescue ETA 0600 hours. 0600, 6:00 a.m., 9 hours from now. Jake looked at his patients. Sarah's pulse was thready. Apollo's breathing had worsened. Even with the shelter and heat packs, they were all deteriorating. 9 hours might as well be 9 years. We need a better plan, Jake muttered. He pulled out his topo map, spreading it across his lap, using his headlamp to study the terrain. They were in the Cascade Wilderness, a roadless area spanning hundreds of square miles. The nearest road capable of handling an ambulance was Forest Service Road 47. The road Jake had driven in on, 4 miles away. 4 miles of steep, technical terrain in full darkness with temperatures at 15 degrees and falling. Impossible to carry Sarah that distance. Impossible to carry 3 injured dogs. But not impossible for one person to reach the road. Jake studied the map more carefully, tracing potential routes with his finger. There, a ridgeline that ran northwest. If he climbed out of the ravine, he could follow the ridge for 2 miles, drop down into the valley, and intercept the road at a bridge crossing. 2.5 miles, technical climbing, in darkness, in freezing temperatures, but possible. If Jake could reach the road, he could intercept the rescue team, guide them directly to this location, potentially save hours. But it meant leaving Sarah and the dogs alone for at least 3 hours. Jake looked at Sarah. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. She wouldn't make it 9 hours, maybe not even 6. "Sarah," Jake said gently, "I need you to wake up." Her eye opened slowly, unfocused. "I'm going to get help. I can reach the road, bring the rescue team directly here. But I have to leave you for a few hours." Panic flickered in Sarah's expression. "The dogs will be here with you. I'm leaving Havoc. He'll keep watch, keep you warm. But I need you to stay awake. Can you do that? Can you stay awake and keep your dogs calm?" Sarah's functioning hand reached out, grabbing Jake's wrist with surprising strength. "Don't leave us. I'm not leaving you. I'm going to save you. Trust me, Sarah. This is what I do." She held his gaze for a long moment, and Jake saw her making the decision, weighing the risk of him leaving against the certainty of death if he stayed. Finally, she nodded. "Go. Bring them back." Jake squeezed her hand, then climbed out of the wreck. He whistled, and Havoc appeared at the edge of the embankment, descending the slope with careful precision. When the Malinois reached the bottom, Jake knelt, gripping Havoc's harness, looking into those intelligent amber eyes. "Havoc, listen. Guard. Protect. Stay with the pack." Havoc whined, understanding the command but not liking it. He'd never been separated from Jake on a mission. "I know, boy, I know. But they need you here. I need you here. Can you do this for me?" Havoc looked at the wreck, at the injured dogs, at Sarah's pale face visible through the gap in the tarp. Then he looked back at Jake and barked once. "Affirmative. I've got them." Jake hugged his dog, pressing his face against Havoc's neck. "Good boy, best boy. I'll be back before dawn." He stood, shed everything non-essential from his pack, water, food, first aid supplies, and left it all in the wreck. Then he began to climb. The ascent out of the ravine was brutal. Every handhold was ice. Every foothold threatened to give way. Jake's hands were numb within minutes, his fingers barely able to grip the rope he'd left, in place. But he climbed because that's what SEALs did. They pushed through impossible, through brutal, through hell itself, because someone was depending on them. When he finally pulled himself over the edge of the embankment, his arms shaking from exertion, he allowed himself 30 seconds to catch his breath. Then he started running. Jake Morrison had run through deserts while carrying wounded teammates, had swum through frigid ocean water in full combat gear, had marched for 3 days straight on a combat patrol that should have killed him. But this run, through darkness, through forest so dense he couldn't see 3 feet ahead, over terrain that wanted to kill him, ranked among the hardest physical efforts of his life. He ran by a headlamp, the narrow beam of LED light his only guide through the maze of trees. The topographic map was memorized, the route burned into his brain, but reality never matched the clean lines of cartography. Deadfalls blocked his path. Streams ran where the map showed solid ground. Cliffs appeared in the darkness like open mouths waiting to swallow him. Jake's lungs burned in the frigid air, each breath like inhaling broken glass. His thighs screamed as he climbed steep slopes. His hands bled where he'd gripped frozen branches, the blood freezing before it could drip. But he didn't stop. Behind him, in that ravine, a woman was dying. 3 dogs were dying, and Havoc, his partner, his brother, was alone with them, trusting that Jake would bring help. Failure is not an option, he repeated in his mind like a mantra. Failure is not an option. The first mile took 40 minutes of brutal climbing. The ridgeline was steeper than the map had indicated, and the ice made every step a potential disaster. Jake slipped twice, catching himself on trees, his heart hammering as loose rocks clattered down into darkness. At the top of the ridge, he paused only long enough to check his bearing. The bridge should be northeast, approximately 1.5 miles. The terrain would drop, following a creek bed that would lead to the Forest Service road. Jake started down, moving faster now, letting gravity help, using controlled slides down icy slopes, catching himself on trees to prevent full falls. The second mile took 30 minutes. Jake was moving faster, his body warming despite the cold, his mind entering that zone where pain became background noise and the mission was everything. He was thinking about Sarah, about her first words, "Save my dogs," not herself, her dogs. The same way Jake's first thought in any crisis was always Havoc. He was thinking about Apollo, the dog who'd found 6 missing children. How many more children would die if Apollo didn't survive to search for them? He was thinking about Blitz, stoic and loyal, still protecting his handler even with a broken leg. He was thinking about Freya, the puppy who'd curled against him, trusting humans to keep her safe. He was thinking about Havoc, alone in the dark, with 4 dying beings, carrying out orders because that's what good dogs did. "Faster!" Jake's mind screamed. "Move faster!" The creek bed appeared ahead, a dark channel cutting through the forest. Jake followed it downward, the sound of running water his guide. His ankle turned on a hidden rock, pain shooting up his leg, but he didn't slow. Then, through the trees ahead, he saw it. The dull gray of pavement, the reflective markers of a bridge railing, Forest Service Road 47. Jake burst from the tree line like a man pursued by demons, his headlamp beam swinging wildly, his breath coming in great heaving gasps. The road was empty, silent. No vehicles, no rescue team yet. Jake checked his watch, 11:47 p.m. He'd made the journey in 2 hours and 47 minutes. The rescue team wasn't scheduled to arrive until 6 a.m., still more than 6 hours away. But Jake had a better idea. He pulled out his emergency strobe, activated it, and placed it in the middle of the road. The bright blue pulse would be visible to any aircraft, any vehicle, anything looking for survivors. Then he started running again, this time down the road toward civilization, toward the ranger station he knew was 20 miles south, toward any sign of human presence. He'd made it, perhaps 2 miles, his legs threatening to give out, when he saw lights ahead, red and white, moving toward him, a vehicle, coming from the south. Jake ran into the middle of the road, waving his arms, his headlamp beam cutting through the night. The vehicle, a Forest Service truck, skidded to a stop, its brakes squealing. 2 Rangers jumped out, hands on their sidearms, clearly alarmed by the wild man who'd appeared in their headlights. "Emergency!" Jake gasped, his voice ragged. "Officer down. Multiple casualties, 4 miles northeast. Need immediate extraction." The Rangers looked at each other, then at Jake's official-looking gear, his GPS unit, his obvious distress. "Who are you?" the senior ranger demanded. "Senior Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, U.S. Navy SEALs. I sent a distress beacon 3 hours ago. You have a state police K9 officer and 3 military working dogs critical condition in a ravine. We need air evac now." The mention of state police and his military rank changed the ranger's entire demeanor. The senior ranger grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Station 3. We have contact with the distress beacon from earlier. Multiple casualties confirmed. Requesting immediate helicopter support and ground ambulance to—" He looked at Jake expectantly. Jake rattled off the coordinates from memory. "Copy that," the dispatcher responded. "Air evac is wheels up in 10 minutes. Ground crew is mobilizing. ETA 45 minutes for helicopter, 2 hours for ground support." 45 minutes. That was doable. That was survivable. "I need to get back to the site," Jake said. "My dog is there. The victims need medical support." "You're not going back up that mountain alone," the senior ranger said. "We'll take the truck as far as we can, then we go together." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to run ahead, but the ranger was right. He was exhausted, hypothermic, and running on fumes. If he collapsed in the forest, he'd be another casualty. "Let's move," Jake said. They loaded into the truck and drove hard, the vehicle bouncing over the rough road, headlights cutting through darkness. When the terrain became impassable, they geared up with technical rescue equipment and started the hike. The 2 Rangers were professionals, trained in wilderness rescue, but even they struggled to keep pace with Jake, who moved with the desperate energy of a man trying to save his family. They reached the ravine site at 1:33 a.m. Jake rappelled down first, his heart in his throat, terrified of what he'd find. The tarp shelter was still standing. His strobe light still flashed inside, and standing guard at the entrance, silhouetted by the chemical glow sticks, was Havoc. The Malinois saw Jake and barked once, a bark of relief and joy. Then he moved aside, letting Jake enter. Inside, Sarah was still breathing. Barely. Her lips were blue, her skin waxen, but she was alive. The 3 dogs were huddled together, all 3 still breathing. Apollo's breathing had worsened. A death rattle that Jake recognized, but he was fighting. "I'm back," Jake said, his voice breaking. "I'm back, and help is coming." Sarah's eye opened, focusing on him. "You came back." "Always," Jake said. "SEALs don't leave anyone behind." Above, the sound of rotors cut through the night. The rescue helicopter had arrived. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty." The helicopter was a Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk on loan from Joint Base Lewis McChord. When dispatch had learned the situation involved a downed state police K9 unit and a Navy SEAL, they'd scrambled military resources. The bird couldn't land in the ravine. The terrain was impossible, but it could hover, could lower equipment, could winch people up. The crew included a flight paramedic and a military working dog handler, specifically requested when they'd learned about the injured K9s. The first basket came down carrying a Navy corpsman named Petty Officer Angela Chen. She took one look at Sarah and immediately began advanced life support, IV fluids, oxygen, pain management, warming blankets. "BP is 80/50, Chen called up to the helicopter. "Possible internal bleeding. We need to move her now." The second basket brought K9 Handler Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb and specialized veterinary trauma equipment. Webb, a grizzled man in his 40s who'd worked with military dogs for 20 years, assessed all 3 dogs with professional efficiency. The big male, Blitz, stable enough for transport. The small one, Apollo, critical. Needs immediate surgical intervention. The young female, Freya, stable, scared, but she'll make it. "Can we transport all 4 at once?" Jake asked. "Negative," the helicopter crew chief called down. "Max weight capacity is 2 humans or 1 human and 2 dogs per lift. We'll need 3 trips." Jake made the decision without hesitation. Sarah and Apollo first. They're the most critical. Staff Sergeant Webb nodded in agreement. "Apollo won't make it without immediate surgery. Every minute counts." They secured Sarah in the basket first, strapping her immobilized body carefully, the IV line running to a bag held by Chen. Then Webb carefully placed Apollo, now sedated, in a specialized K9 carrier that clipped to the basket. "I'll go up with them," Chen said. "Monitor vitals during the ride." The cable tightened and the basket rose. Jake watched Sarah disappear into the belly of the helicopter, watched Apollo's carrier swing gently in the rotor wash, and felt a weight lift from his chest. They were going to make it. All of them. The helicopter banked away, heading toward Harbor View Medical Center in Seattle, the only Level 1 trauma center within 100 miles with both human and veterinary surgical capacity. While they waited for the bird to return, a 45-minute round trip, Jake, Webb, and the 2 Rangers kept Blitz and Freya warm and calm. "You did good work here," Webb said, examining Jake's field dressings on Blitz. "Most people would have panicked, made mistakes. You probably saved this dog's leg." "I've had good teachers," Jake replied, thinking of the K9 handlers he'd worked with overseas, the men and women who'd taught him that dogs weren't equipment. They were warriors who deserved the same level of care as any human operator. Havoc sat pressed against Jake's side, having earned the rest. The Malinois had completed his mission perfectly, had kept watch, had kept the pack together, had trusted Jake to return. Jake scratched behind Havoc's ears. "Best dog in the world." Havoc's tail thumped once. "I know." The helicopter returned at 2:47 a.m. This time, they sent down a specialized K9 harness for Blitz and a standard basket for Freya. "You going up with them?" the crew chief called down. Jake looked at the 2 Rangers, at Webb, at Havoc. His responsibility was to these dogs. Sarah would want to know they were safe. "Affirmative. I'll accompany the K9s." Webb handed him a card. "That's the emergency vet at Harbor View, Dr. Patricia Santos. Tell her Staff Sergeant Webb sent you. She's the best there is." Jake clipped into the harness next to Blitz, held Freya's carrier secure, and gave the thumbs up. The world dropped away as the cable lifted them. The forest fell away below, revealing the vast expanse of darkness and snow, the wreckage of the Tahoe looking impossibly small in the ravine. Then they were inside the helicopter, the crew chief securing them, the bird banking hard toward Seattle. Jake looked at the two dogs, Blitz watching him with those intelligent eyes, Freya sleeping under sedation, and felt the adrenaline that had sustained him for 8 hours finally begin to fade. His hands started shaking. The cold he'd been ignoring hit him all at once. His body, pushed beyond reasonable limits, started to shut down. The crew chief wrapped him in a blanket, pressed a hot pack into his hands. "Easy, Senior Chief. You're in shock. Just breathe. You did it. You saved them all." Jake closed his eyes, let his head rest against the vibrating bulkhead of the helicopter, and for the first time since he'd heard that crash, he let himself believe it. They were all going to make it. Harborview Medical Center blazed with lights as the Black Hawk touched down on the roof helipad at 3:52 a.m. 2 trauma teams were waiting, 1 human, 1 veterinary. Sarah was whisked away to surgery. Apollo went directly to the veterinary surgical suite. Blitz and Freya were taken to the critical care unit. Jake, running on nothing but will and black coffee, refused to leave. He followed the veterinary team, Havoc at his heel, until a nurse, small but fierce, physically blocked his path. "Sir, you need medical evaluation. You're hypothermic and showing signs of exhaustion. Your dog, too." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're shaking so hard you can barely stand. There's blood on your hands. Your lips are blue." The nurse softened slightly. "Let us take care of you so you can take care of them. You're no good to those dogs if you collapse." Jake wanted to argue, but the room tilted suddenly and he realized she was right. They examined him in the ER, minor hypothermia, dehydration, contusions, some frostbite on his fingers. Nothing serious for a man who'd just run a mountain in the middle of the night. They gave him warm IV fluids, wrapped him in heated blankets, and forced him to drink terrible coffee. Havoc received his own examination from a veterinary tech who declared him tired but tough, just like his handler. At 7:30 a.m., a surgeon in the blood-splattered scrubs emerged from the OR. Dr. Patricia Santos looked exhausted but satisfied. "Apollo made it through surgery," she announced. "Collapsed lung, internal bleeding from a lacerated spleen. We removed the spleen, reinflated the lung, and transfused 2 units of blood. The next 48 hours are critical, but he's a fighter." "And Blitz? Freya?" "Blitz's leg was set surgically. He'll need months of rehab, but he'll walk again. Might even work again if he wants to. Freya's shoulder was relocated and stabilized. She'll make a full recovery. She's young, resilient." Jake felt tears prick his eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Thank whoever did the field medicine that kept them alive long enough to reach me." Dr. Santos looked at Jake's medical bracelet, saw the patient designation, and her eyes widened. You're the one who stabilized them?" "Navy SEAL Corpsman training. We're taught to treat human and K9 casualties." Dr. Santos shook her head in amazement. "That field work was exceptional. You saved their lives." 2 hours later, Jake was finally allowed to see Sarah. She was in ICU, her leg elevated and casted, her face still pale but no longer the color of death. She was awake, groggy from anesthesia, but awake. Her eyes found Jake immediately. "My dogs." Jake pulled a chair next to her bed. "All 3 alive. All 3 going to recover fully. Apollo came through surgery. Blitz's leg is repaired. Freya's gonna be fine." Sarah closed her eyes, tears running down her cheeks. "You saved them. You saved us all. Just did what needed doing." "No." Sarah reached out, gripping Jake's hand with surprising strength. "You ran into mountains in darkness. You stayed when you could have left. You promised me we'd all make it out, and you kept that promise. That's not what needed doing. That's heroism." Jake didn't know what to say to that, so he just squeezed her hand back. "Can I see them?" Sarah asked. "Can I see my dogs?" Jake looked at the nurse, who nodded. "We can arrange a visit. Tomorrow, when everyone's stronger." But Jake had a better idea. He walked down to the veterinary ward, where Blitz was awake in his recovery kennel. The big Malinois was heavily bandaged, his leg in a cast, but his eyes were alert. Jake opened the kennel. "You want to see your handler?" Blitz stood carefully, balancing on 3 legs, and limped to Jake. 5 minutes later, Jake pushed a wheelchair into Sarah's room. In the wheelchair sat Blitz, his head high, his tail wagging slowly despite the pain. "Blitz," Sarah sobbed. She leaned down, wrapping her arms around the dog's neck, and Blitz licked her face, whimpering with joy. They stayed like that for a long time, handler and dog, reunited, both broken, but both alive. Jake slipped out of the room quietly, giving them privacy. In the hallway, he found Havoc waiting patiently. "Come on, buddy," Jake said. "Let's find somewhere to sleep." They found an empty waiting room. Jake collapsed onto the uncomfortable couch, and Havoc jumped up beside him, technically against hospital rules. But no one was going to tell a Navy SEAL and his dog to separate after what they'd been through. Jake was asleep in seconds, Havoc's head on his chest, both of them finally at peace. Jake woke to sunlight streaming through the waiting room windows and the smell of fresh coffee. He opened his eyes to find a woman in a Washington State Police uniform sitting across from him, 2 paper cups steaming on the table between them. "Senior Chief Morrison?" the woman asked. She was in her 50s with short gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent a career in command. Her nameplate read Captain Elena Martinez. Jake sat up carefully, Havoc stirring beside him. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Captain Martinez, Sarah Coltrane's commanding officer. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did." She pushed one of the coffee cups toward him, and to get your statement about the accident if you're feeling up to it. Over the next hour, Jake walked Martinez through everything, finding the wreck, stabilizing Sarah and the dogs, his run to reach help, the evacuation. Martinez recorded it all, taking detailed notes. "The accident itself. Did you observe any mechanical failure? Any indication of impairment?" "No, ma'am. From what Sarah told me, a deer jumped into the road. She swerved to avoid it and lost control. Wrong place, wrong time. Just an accident." Martinez nodded, relief evident on her face. "That matches the preliminary scene investigation. Sarah's record is impeccable. I wanted to make sure there were no other factors." She closed her notebook and looked at Jake directly. "You should know. What you did last night is beyond extraordinary. Most people would have activated the beacon and waited for rescue. You went down into that ravine, kept 4 critical patients alive for hours in sub-zero temperatures, then ran through mountains in darkness to expedite rescue. That's not normal civilian behavior. That's not even normal military behavior." Jake shrugged uncomfortably. "I'm a SEAL. We're trained for this. You're trained for combat rescue, not wilderness emergency medicine. You're trained to operate as a team, not solo, and you're on leave. You could have waited for professional search and rescue." Martinez leaned forward. I'm putting you in for a civilian life-saving award. The governor's going to want to meet you." "That's not necessary. It's already done. The story's already hit the news. Navy SEAL saves State Police K9 unit." "It's everywhere," Jake groaned. "I really don't want publicity." "Too late. You're a hero. Deal with it." Martinez's expression softened. "But seriously, thank you. Sarah's one of my best officers. Those dogs are irreplaceable. You gave them all a future they wouldn't have had." After Martinez left, Jake checked on the dogs. Apollo was still critical but stable, surrounded by monitoring equipment, sedated and resting. Blitz was awake and eating, a good sign. Freya was up and moving, her tail wagging weakly when she saw Jake. "Hey, brave girl," Jake murmured, scratching her ears. "You did so good." Dr. Santos found him in the veterinary ward. "All three are going to make full recoveries. Apollo's the question mark. He needs another 72 hours before we're out of the woods, but his vitals are improving." "And working again? Will they be able to return to duty?" "Blitz and Freya, yes. With rehab and retraining, they'll be fine." "Apollo," Dr. Santos hesitated. "The splenectomy means he'll be immunocompromised. Might not be safe to deploy him in situations where he could be injured again. He'd be a liability in the field." Jake's chest tightened. "So, he'd be retired?" "Most likely, but he'd make an excellent therapy dog. Many retired police and military dogs go on to work with PTSD patients, veterans, children. Apollo has the temperament for it." Jake thought about that. A dog who'd spent his career finding missing children, now helping heal broken people. There was poetry in that. Over the next week, Jake became a fixture at Harborview. He'd rented a hotel room nearby, but spent most of his time at the hospital, visiting Sarah, checking on the dogs, helping however he could. Sarah's recovery was progressing. The surgeons had saved her leg, though she faced months of physical therapy. Her collarbone would heal. The internal injuries were serious, but not life-threatening. "They're talking about 6 months before I can return to active duty," Sarah told Jake during one visit. She was sitting up now, color returning to her face. 6 months of physical therapy, psychological evaluation, the whole 9 yards. "That's good," Jake said. "Gives your dogs time to recover too. You'll all come back together." "Blitz and Freya, yeah, but Apollo..." Sarah's voice broke. "They're retiring him. Medical discharge." "I heard. I'm sorry. He's only 3 years old. He had so much life left as a working dog." Sarah wiped her eyes. "I know it's the right decision. I know he needs to be safe. But it feels like I failed him." "You didn't fail him. You saved him. You kept him alive until I found you. And he's going to have a great life doing therapy work. He'll help people heal. That's a different kind of service, but it's still service." Sarah looked at Jake for a long moment. "You know what I realized while we were trapped in that ravine? I spent so much time proving I could do this job, proving I was tough enough, that I forgot why I wanted to do it in the first place. I wanted to help people, save lives, make a difference. You do that every day. So do you, and you're not even trying to prove anything. You just do what's right because it's right." Jake didn't know how to respond to that, so he changed the subject. "Havoc wanted me to give you this." He pulled out a tennis ball from his pocket, slightly chewed, well-loved. "It's his favorite. He wants Blitz to have it, for recovery motivation." Sarah laughed, tears running down her face. "Tell Havoc thank you, and tell him Blitz will treasure it." On day 5, Dr. Santos cleared Blitz and Freya for supervised visitation with Sarah. Jake wheeled Sarah down to the veterinary ward where both dogs were waiting. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking. Blitz limped over to his handler, pressing his head against her chest, while Freya danced on 3 legs, her tail wagging so hard her entire body wiggled. "My brave boys and girl," Sarah whispered, hugging them both. "My brave, beautiful babies. We made it. We all made it." Apollo was still too fragile to move, but they brought Sarah to his recovery kennel. The tracking dog was awake now, groggy but aware. When he saw Sarah, his tail thumped weakly against the blanket. "Hey, Apollo," Sarah said softly, reaching through the kennel bars to touch his head. "Hey, buddy. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You got hurt." Apollo licked her hand, his brown eyes full of forgiveness and love. Jake watched from the doorway, Havoc sitting beside him. The Malinois was watching the reunion intently, his ears forward, his expression content. In the language of working dogs, this was mission success. Later that week, Jake received a visit from his commanding officer. Captain James Reaper Sullivan had driven up from Virginia Beach, which meant this was serious. "Sir," Jake said, standing at attention in his hospital clothes. "At ease, Jake. Sit down before you fall down. You look like hell." Jake sat. "Sorry, sir. Mandatory leave got a little complicated." "A little?" Reaper pulled out a tablet, showing Jake news articles. "You're a national hero. Every news outlet in the country is running the story. The Navy's getting calls from the Pentagon, from the governor's office, from CNN. Everyone wants to interview you." "Permission to decline all interviews, sir?" "Denied. You're doing at least one. We need good press, and Navy SEAL Saves Police Dogs is the best press we've had all year." Reaper's expression softened. "But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to check on you. You okay?" Jake considered the question. Was he okay? He'd gone into the mountains to escape the weight of his last deployment, to decompress from the trauma. Instead, he'd been thrown into a different kind of mission, one that had tested him in different ways. But something had shifted. The nightmares that had plagued him for months, the faces of the men he'd lost, the children he couldn't save, had quieted. "I think I'm okay, sir. I think I needed this. Needed to remember that I can save people, not just kill people. Needed to remember what I'm fighting for." Reaper nodded slowly. "Your psych eval is in 3 weeks. I think you're going to pass it. And Jake, I'm proud of you. What you did here, that's what we're supposed to be. Warriors who protect." "Thank you, sir. Now get some rest. And when you're cleared, your team wants you back. They miss their senior chief." After Reaper left, Jake walked back to Sarah's room. She was sleeping, Blitz curled on the floor beside her bed. Technically against hospital rules, but no one had the heart to separate them. Jake sat in the visitor's chair, Havoc settling at his feet. Through the window, he could see the Seattle skyline, the mountains beyond, the vast expanse of the Pacific Northwest. He'd come here looking for peace. He'd found something better. Purpose. Spring had come to the Cascade Mountains. The snow had melted, revealing meadows of wildflowers. The air smelled of pine and possibility. Jake Morrison stood in the parking lot of the Washington State Police K9 training facility, Havoc beside him, waiting. A car pulled up, Sarah Coltrane behind the wheel, moving carefully but confidently. She stepped out, still using a cane, her leg in a supportive brace. But she was walking. She was here. And from the back seat emerged 3 Belgian Malinois. Blitz, limping slightly but mobile, Freya bouncing with puppy enthusiasm, and Apollo moving slowly but steadily. They cleared me for light duty, Sarah said, grinning, and all 3 dogs are medically approved for modified work schedules. We're back. Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's incredible. Blitz will be doing patrol work, reduced hours. Freya's officially graduated. She's a certified cadaver dog now. And Apollo... Sarah's smile widened. Apollo's been assigned to work with veteran support services. He'll be doing therapy work with PTSD patients at the VA hospital. That's perfect for him. I know, and I wanted you to meet someone. From the passenger seat, a small figure emerged. A boy, maybe 8 years old, with dark hair and shy eyes. He walked directly to Apollo, who lowered his head so the child could hug him. This is Marcus, Sarah explained. He went missing in the woods 2 years ago. Apollo found him, hypothermic but alive, after 16 hours. Marcus has had nightmares ever since, afraid of the woods, afraid of the dark. But when he heard Apollo was going to do therapy work, he asked to meet him. Jake watched as the boy whispered something to Apollo, and the dog licked his face, tail wagging. The fear in the child's eyes lessened, replaced by wonder and trust. Apollo saved his life, Sarah continued. Now Apollo's helping him heal from the trauma. That's powerful. Yeah, Jake agreed softly. That's what good dogs do. They save us in every way there is. They walked together through the training facility, watching K9 officers put their dogs through drills. Sarah pointed out improvements that had been made since the accident. Your story changed things, she said. The department got funding for better safety equipment, better trauma training for K9 handlers, mandatory GPS beacons for all wilderness units. You probably saved lives that haven't even been at risk yet. It was a team effort. No, Jake, it was you. You could have waited for rescue. You could have left us, but you didn't. You put yourself in danger to save people and dogs you'd never met. That's heroism. They reached a memorial wall, newly installed, honoring K9 officers who'd served. At the bottom was a new plaque. In honor of Senior Chief Petty Officer Jacob Morrison, U.S. Navy SEALs, whose courage, skill, and compassion exemplified the best of human K9 partnership. Through darkness and cold, he carried hope. He reminded us that heroes walk among us. Jake stared at the plaque, uncomfortable with the recognition but understanding its importance. One more thing, Sarah said. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter written in a child's careful handwriting. Dear Mr. Jake, my name is Lily. I am 6. Officer Sarah and Apollo found me last month when I got lost. My mommy said Apollo almost died, but you saved him. Thank you for saving Apollo so he could find me. You are my hero. Love, Lily. Attached was a crayon drawing of a stick figure man with a dog, surrounded by hearts. Jake's vision blurred. He carefully folded the letter and placed it in his pocket, next to his heart. There have been 5 more, Sarah said quietly. 5 more missing people found by K9 units this year, because those dogs survived, because you saved them. 2 weeks later, Jake stood in the Washington state capitol, wearing his dress blues, Havoc at his side in his formal service harness. The governor's Medal of Valor ceremony was packed with press, state officials, and representatives from every law enforcement agency in Washington. Sarah was there, standing straighter now, her dogs beside her. Captain Martinez was there. Dr. Santos was there. Even Reaper had flown out to represent the Navy. Senior Chief Petty Officer Jacob Morrison, the governor announced, exemplified the highest ideals of service and sacrifice. When faced with impossible odds, he chose action over safety, compassion over convenience, and courage over comfort. On behalf of the people of Washington, I present you with the Governor's Medal of Valor." The medal was heavy around Jake's neck, but not as heavy as the weight of the lives he'd saved. After the ceremony, after the photos and handshakes and thank yous, Jake found a quiet moment with Sarah and her dogs. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Back to Virginia? Back to your team?" "Yeah," Jake said. "I'm cleared for duty. Team's got a deployment in 2 months, but I'll be back. To visit, to check on you guys." "You better," Sarah smiled. "These dogs consider you family now. So do I." Blitz approached Jake, carrying something in his mouth, a worn tennis ball, Havoc's tennis ball, the one Jake had given him weeks ago. Blitz dropped it at Jake's feet and wagged his tail. "He wants you to throw it," Sarah translated. Jake picked up the ball and threw it across the lawn. Blitz took off, Freya chasing after him, both dogs moving with joy despite their healing injuries. Apollo watched from Sarah's side, his tail wagging slowly, content to observe. Havoc looked up at Jake, his amber eyes full of wisdom and love. The Malinois had been there for every moment, had kept watch in the freezing ravine, had trusted Jake to return, had helped save 4 lives through his discipline and loyalty. "Good boy, Havoc," Jake murmured. "Best boy in the world." As the sun set over the Capitol, painting the sky in gold and purple, Jake watched the dogs play. He thought about the road that had led him here, the deployments, the losses, the trauma he'd been running from. He'd gone into those mountains to escape darkness. Instead, he'd found light. He'd gone searching for peace. Instead, he'd found purpose. And he'd learned something crucial, that the skills forged in war could also be instruments of mercy, that the same hands trained to kill could also heal, that a warrior's greatest victory wasn't destroying enemies, it was saving the innocent. Sarah came to stand beside him. "What are you thinking?" "That I'm grateful," Jake said simply. "Grateful for the accident that led me to you. Grateful for the chance to make a difference. Grateful for dogs who love us even when we don't deserve it." "You deserve it," Sarah said firmly. "You deserve all of it." Blitz returned with the tennis ball, dropping it at Jake's feet again, ready for another throw. Jake obliged, and the game continued as the light faded, as the stars appeared, as the world turned toward night. In that moment, surrounded by dogs who had survived against impossible odds, and people who had found family in unexpected places, Jake Morrison finally understood what peace felt like. It wasn't silence. It wasn't the absence of challenge. It was knowing that when darkness came, and it always came, there would be light to answer it. It was knowing that he would never face it alone. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it Havoc's loyalty, Jake's determination, or Sarah's love for her dogs? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story. Jake returned to Washington in November, on leave again, but this time it was leave by choice, not mandate. He visited Sarah at her home, a small ranch outside Timber Ridge where she now lived with her 3 dogs. She'd been promoted to training supervisor, working to improve K9 handler safety protocols across the state. Apollo had become the face of the K9 therapy program, working 3 days a week at the VA hospital. He'd helped 37 veterans manage their PTSD, and the program was expanding nationally. Blitz had returned to patrol work, lighter duty, but still protecting his handler with the same unwavering loyalty. He'd made 4 apprehensions in 6 months, proof that a broken dog could heal and serve. Freya had found her calling, successfully locating remains in 9 cases, giving families closure, bringing peace to the grieving. "They're all heroes," Sarah said as they watched the dogs play in her yard. "Every single one of them." "So are you," Jake replied. "We all are. You taught me that. It's not about being perfect or unbreakable, it's about showing up when it matters, about doing what's right even when it's hard." Jake pulled out a photograph from his jacket, the crayon drawing from Lily, now framed. "I keep this on my desk in Virginia. Reminds me why we do what we do. To protect the lilies of the world? Yeah, and the Apollos, and the Sarahs, all of them." As the sun set over the mountains, Jake threw the tennis ball one more time. Havoc and Blitz raced after it, 2 warriors who understood that the greatest strength wasn't in violence, but in the willingness to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. And in that moment, everything that had seemed broken, the trauma, the pain, the fear, was transformed into something whole. Not healed, perhaps, but stronger for having been broken and put back together. That was the truth that war had taught Jake, and peace had reminded him. We are all wounded, we are all scarred, but we are also capable of incredible courage, profound love, and miraculous recovery. We just need someone to believe in us enough to pull us from the ravine. This story is dedicated to all K9 officers and their handlers, law enforcement, military, and search and rescue, who risk everything to keep us safe, to the dogs who serve with loyalty beyond measure, and to the warriors who protect both the 2-legged and 4-legged among us. Thank you for your service. Thank you for reminding us that courage comes in all forms, and that the bond between human and dog is one of the most powerful forces in the world.